Hello, I'm Lindley Gooden. Welcome to the Market Force webinar, Customer Experience in the Age of Robotics, held in association with Kofax. Now, the rise of robotics has inspired both excitement and fear among employees across industries and consumers alike. The media often splashes headlines predicting robots causing the loss of jobs, and films portray a world in which all-knowing robots gain absolute autonomy out of the control of any human on the planet. Brilliant. But what will the reality of robotics look like, and where will the best opportunities and greatest challenges lie when it comes to the customer experience? Well, that's why we're here today. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing everything from RPA to chatbots and looking at how they can revolutionize the customer journey for the better. We'll also look at how you'll need to prepare. There's lots to talk about, from dealing with customer data in the right way to maintaining employee morale. So what can you do right now to succeed in the age of robotics, and how can you tackle some of the problems that arise along the way? Let's find out and straight away meet our panelists. First of all, Jonathan Kidd. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Jonathan is Head of Robotics and Transformation at Bank of Ireland. He's also a member of the Open Banking Working Group at European Banking Association. Jonathan's held senior positions in mobile banking, payments and IT architecture within Bank of Ireland. And prior to that, he was IT director at an internet travel company. Good to see you today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Elliot Biggs. Hello, Elliot.
Hi there.
Good to see you too. Elliot is Strategic Development Director at Aegis. Now, Elliot has worked in the financial services sector for over 15 years with an extensive career in IT, business transformation and strategic planning. Elliot's motivated by a desire to grow businesses to become fitter and stronger, embedding change and delivering great outcomes for customers and internal stakeholders. Great to see you today.
You too.
Next up, we have Daniel Robinson. Hello, Daniel.
Hello.
Daniel is Transformation Director at More Than, part of the RSA Insurance Group. His focus is on driving forward both the digital and cultural transformation of the business, incorporating agile and lean approaches with a large dose of customer focus to drive an agenda of pace, accountability, and relentless test and learn. Good to hear it.
Thank you.
Next up, and finally, we have Dermot Macaulay. Hello, Dermot.
Hello, Lindley.
Dermot is Vice President of Marketing at Kofax. In that role, he focuses on automation of people-intensive and document-intensive processes. The Kofax portfolio encompasses robotic process automation, teeth in, document capture, process management, analytics, e-signature, customer communication management, and content handling in a unified software platform. Good to see you. Thanks to Kofax for supporting our webinar.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Great. Well, we have lots and lots to talk about over the next hour, and many of you will have your own comments and questions for us, so I'll give you the opportunity to put them to our panelists throughout the webinar. Get in touch either using the Twitter hashtag, which is CXRobotics, or the question section right here on our webpage. We'll get to as many as we can towards the end of the discussion. Plus, we have 2 short poll questions for you, so stand by and we'll have the first of those in about 10-15 minutes. So get ready with your fingers at the ready. For now, let's get started. It's estimated that the value of the robotics market will hit around $135 billion by 2019. So how much of that is driven by customers? Dan, if you can kick us off and just tell us, how is the customer demand driving automation?
Yeah, I think first of all, hands up from the financial services industry particular. I think this really started with expense reduction, particularly on back-end processing. But very quickly, I think our focus is very much more customer driven. It's about making a slicker, quicker, better customer experience now.
Yeah. Cost first, customer experience obviously now, Dermot. Really
yeah,
important.
we've experienced that hugely. So the first wave, I think you could call it, of robotics was about efficiency. And it was heavily driven by the institutions themselves. But the second wave is driven by a radical change in customer expectation and behavior. We've seen in the last 10 years with internet, mobile, social technology, people have more choices, less patience. They need an experience. And what we discovered really at the end of phase 1 of robotics is that we can actually use robotics to make the customer experience much better as well. So that experience really is driving a second wave of automation, I believe.
It's been possible in principle for a while. It's now possible. It's practical. You can actually buy and get into this this process. But in banking, of course, there's been so much work going on, Jonathan. That how are banks doing at the moment, do you think?
I think maybe a little unusually, I think banks are doing very well. I think they have maybe some advantages in the sense that they have scale, they have standard processes, they have a competitive need to modernise, to reduce cost-income ratios, to reduce costs generally, to free people up to focus more on value-added customer-facing activities. And I would agree with what the guys started out with. We definitely very much when a business starts in automation, it's cost-focused. How much cost can we take out? But actually, regularly when we speak to our peers, they find that when they get into it, actually it's the customer benefits, the risk benefits, and ironically the people, staff-related benefits, which are actually much more the tangible things that we find when we get into it.
It's really starting to meet in the middle now, isn't it?
Very
It
much
really
so,
is.
and very much become part of the workforce as opposed to a replacement for the workforce.
Elliot, how about insurance? How's that working?
I think many of the same themes as we've heard, really. Insurance as an industry has increasing customer expectations of it, I think, set from industries other than insurance. I also think insurance is an industry with quite a lot of legacy, and therefore robotics and automation has been used quite extensively to try and overcome some of those challenges and remove them as blockers for delivering great customer service.
Yeah, and Dan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I certainly recognise that. I mean, I think robotics can allow you to solve some of the problems very quickly at relatively low cost compared to the much bigger system transformations may be required to get rid of legacy totally. So some might perceive it as a sticking plaster. I see it very much as an enabler to demonstrate you can actually deliver better customer experiences and value and almost buy the license to operate to do some of the bigger things.
And we have banks and insurers here, but also with Kofax. I mean, there are so many other industries, and in many ways they are dealing with it very well. They've realised because of the customer focus, they've come from a different angle almost. And so other industries are doing very well in principle.
Yeah, I would say the early adopters, if you like, were the consumer-driven industries. Retail, telco. One of our customers recently transformed their new application process for opening a broadband account. And they're seeing the opportunity to change and meet those new customer expectations by fueling the relationship and the conversation with information drawn by robotic technology from other sources. But I think non-consumer driven businesses where the customer is not a consumer but another business are quickly seeing that relationship is increasingly important too. And we can change the customer experience where customer is like the big customer, including business customers too. So,
funnily enough, the idea of relationship with your customers is, it's been at the heart of so many conversations over the years. But I actually haven't heard that for such a long time because the technology has come through as the thing you need to focus on. But actually, it comes down to relationship. Elliot, any examples or companies that you think have done really well that you kind of, I wouldn't say idolise, but think they're doing good things?
Well, I think, particularly in insurance, there are a number of organisations that have stepped into the value chain and particularly on that customer interaction side, have systems that really understand how customers want to be dealt with, how they want to interact with insurance. And I think because they don't have some of that legacy that traditional insurers have, they've been able to do that in a much more streamlined way. And clearly they have an advantage there. I think the challenge for us, as we've already mentioned, is about how do we overcome the barriers within perhaps the more established firms.
Any other thoughts of companies that not only have perhaps a good customer relationship already, but thought that automation perhaps would be a good way to streamline processes? Any thoughts, just even from your consumer life? Any thoughts?
My tried and tested favourite example of this is Amazon. I'm sure everyone's probably nodding and they probably use it themselves, but I'm a massive Amazon Prime convert, and the fact that I can one evening do a single swipe to buy something that arrives on my doorstep the next day, I think is phenomenal. I kind of don't care as a consumer how that works, but behind the scenes there is a huge amount of automation from presenting me that thing that I bought in the first place all the way through to getting it to my doorstep.
As a customer, you don't, and we talked about this before we came on, you don't really need to know what the process is. You just mentioned that, Dan. And quite honestly, the really good ones are seamless.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true, isn't it? And, I've used Airbnb. Other accommodation services are available. But again, really technology heavy in many ways, but pretty seamless. Actually, I feel like I'm dealing with a human. And that is the enabling element of the software when it's employed correctly and it starts to join up the dots. That is ultimately
I think joining the dots is an important thing because it's, we go on a journey as a customer, and I had this recently with, it was another high-tech vendor, was Apple. Had to return a set of headphones. I was a little nervous about it because that's usually a horrible experience in my experience, and it was surprisingly, from the beginning right through to the end, they had joined the dots in the multiple touch points I had with them in the journey, and I was continually surprised. They knew who I was, they knew what the problem was, they were able to promise and anticipate what I wanted. And so that sort of beginning to end use of technology behind the scenes really impressed me. So it's building loyalty, whereas I might be thinking of going to another provider if it was a horrible experience.
That's absolutely something we found as well. I think we initially were titled automation or robotics, but actually we rebranded internally to be called digital operations. And the reason for that was that we recognised that there's actually a suite of services built around workflow, RPA, data, management of data, customer communications. There's 4 or 5 or 6 tools actually, many of which Kofax use or bring to market. And actually together they provide the transformation in customer experience. On their own, they're just a link in the chain. But together they allow you to join the dots between the customer and, as you say, a lot of legacy in the back end, which is very difficult to expose in a seamless way. So we found that broader digital context
That's a very
has
interesting.
really
I
got
mean, I've noticed the language evolving. So RPA, the acronym wars, emerging terminology that we see our own customers using is digital process automation, and it ties robotics with those other things you've mentioned.
Absolutely, and the only reason we still use the moniker robotics or the tag of robotics is actually, if you talk about something broader than that, people don't necessarily know what you mean, whereas they've all heard about robotics, but it is that broader skill set and tool set that is actually making the transformation. With robotics maybe at the heart of it.
The robotics is hot, I guess.
It is.
It's hot. The board is interested in robotics.
It is.
How can this benefit me?
And it is a little bit of a silver bullet relative to something maybe longer term like data transformation and personalisation, etc.
Everybody loves a catchphrase, but of course it does wrap all of that. It has to be joined up, and that's why it wraps all of those elements into it. And a lot of people watching us today will be more than just interested. They'll be working day to day in this, as supplying or working with an incumbent organisation. But there are so many opportunities, as we've heard. But Elliot, the Internet of Things, I mean, one of the great assets is that it can bring in information and process it, or help you to process it in the right way. So how can the Internet of Things be employed, be laced in to your awareness of your customer?
I think increasingly in a world which is connected, what we get is access to data far more frequently than what we've had before. It's less transactional and it's far more real time. I think we also get a different kind of data. Rather than just the factual information that we would capture on a web form, we get behavioural data. And I guess the analogy that's perhaps easiest to understand is telematics. Previously people would punch in details about their car and where they live. That's fine, but actually the telematics data gives us much more insight about that individual and their driving habits. And I think the Internet of Things and connected devices can do that in a much broader context. I think the key challenges, though, are how we leverage that, right? So that information is very good, but if it's not driving value outcomes for consumers, or if organisations aren't geared up to actually leverage the data they're receiving, then it's a wasted opportunity.
That is right, and with all the technical knowledge and the employment or the adoption of any technology, including AI, including machine learning, including robotics, which is everything together, the challenges still need to be overcome. You still need to identify what the challenges are before you can start to attack them.
Yes, I'd suggest that in whatever that customer journey might be, if they're opening a new account at the bank, it's very, you really ought to start at the beginning and map out the customer journey and the 10, 12, 14 touch points with that customer and maybe with third parties. And as you're mapping that out, realize that you've got a lot more information, but in this regulatory environment where GDPR is just about to land on all of us, you need to be sure that if you're having a conversation at those touch points with that customer in a great customer experience, at some point you need to have a consent loop and plan the consent loop so the customer says, yes, I'm happy for you to take that information that you've gleaned from our conversational stream in the chatbot and use that to drive your onboarding process for me. Don't leave that to the end. Join the dots.
I think taking that, if you consider that end to end and the customer consent, etc., and if you look at the frequency with which channels are changing and the technologies in the stack are changing, one of the advantages of automation is that it allows you to respond to that very quickly. So, for example, if a new channel is added to our banking front end, we can respond. We can create a robot to interface between that channel and the underlying systems in 8 to 12 weeks, something like that. Whereas if you have to extend the core systems, that's going to take an awful lot longer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the other point I'd make is it's almost like you can't unknow something. So if you as an organisation have got timely real-time data from a customer, then they'll expect you to act on that. Whether if that's the case for fraud in banking, maybe, or in the case of telematics, an accident. Once you know that, you've got an accountability to do something with it. It's not okay to do that 3 days later. It has to be done now. And that's, the customer expectation really it's changed on that.
It's a value exchange, I think, with the customer. If we talked about GDPR and the sensitivity around sharing data. I think providing organisations can demonstrate the value that they can give back to customers through sharing that information, then there's some value in it.
And I think the issue, GDPR is a timely reminder, a very big timely reminder of the need for consent in whichever level that affects your organisation. In financial services, clearly very, very important. But that communication, that line of communication with customers and making it very clear, particularly in things like verbal bots, voice bots. Which types of AI do you think will produce good results and take us forward, do you think, Elliot?
I think particularly as we see that changing human-computer interface, the speech analytics, text analytics, that kind of natural language processing technology and the insights that can drive and the interface that can drive with the consumer is where I think there's a lot of scope and a lot of opportunity. The technology may not be quite there yet, but it's certainly emerging at a pace, and I think that's where we can perhaps shift the dial in terms of how consumers interact with companies long term.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I also think there's almost a step back to get the basics right that we need to do in some areas as well. So I think we can use exactly the same kind of technology to improve our call center demand forecasting, for example, so that customers don't get that we're experiencing a period of unexpected demand, call back 15 minutes time type message. So I think we've got to start with getting the basics right and then get excited for the future, but at the same time not get too excited and too focused on the shiny things when we've still got basics to fix.
I think there's a huge, for me, I totally agree with the guys. I think the biggest component of it is time. So if you ask that question with a 1 year time horizon, I'd say RPA. If you ask that question with a 3 year time horizon, I might say NLP. If you ask it with a 10 year time horizon, I'd say AI and machine learning. So I think what we're trying to do at the moment internally is actually to understand the landscape of artificial intelligence and cognitive computing in its broadest sense, to understand which bits are of use to us now, which bits are quite immature and maybe aren't for 5 years, and where are the pieces in the middle. Because there's an emerging tool set here which is broadening and getting more useful over time.
Which we didn't plan, but let's move into your thoughts on this now with timescales. We now want to hear directly from you. Let's run our first quick poll, just so you can get involved in our conversation. We really value your thoughts on this one as well. It's very simple. Look at the options on the screen now. Vote on your screen as soon as those have come up, and vote on the option that's most applicable to you. The question is, for you right now, is, if you're watching us live, is at what stage is your organisation with RPA, or whichever you want to call it? We use it extensively every day of the week. We use it to a moderate extent when the needs arise. We use it, but to a minor extent, in pilots only. We don't currently use it, but we have plans to, or we have no plans whatsoever. There are a few options there. There are 6 options there. Vote for the one that you think is most relevant, and we'll come back to you in a second for our panel's thoughts very briefly on that. For now, what could the customer experience look like in 10 years' time? And it's very difficult to predict these things, it really is. But potentially, if there's a time scale involved here where machine learning and so on start to really be adopted throughout every organisation, 10 years' time, who fancies that? Dermot?
I'll jump in. I see much more free-form exchanges of information. So I think our interactions with customers will be like conversations. And we'll need these technologies we've just talked about in AI to make them more conversational. Today we've got conversations that are constrained by us forcing them to be form-based. You fill out a form, or there's a structure to them. And there are technologies today, we can call them AI technologies, but they're technologies that are able to do text analytics and extract and understand even free-form streams. I think that the 10-year time streams will be chat-driven, whether voice or not, and we'll be expecting to extract and understand in the context of the chat what is the business required data to drive my new application process, and we'll then be presenting and still using robotics to present back for consent and verification other information we've taken from other sources. So it'll be much more free-flowing much less structured, but the expectations will be there that it's even more efficient for the customer. So it's a challenge for the industry, but I think that's where it'll go.
Briefly, Dan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I agree with all that. I think if we move it on further down the timeline and think about what customers really want, and mainly I think with the financial services organisation, they'd really rather be doing something more interesting. So they want it to be quick, easy, painless, so they can move on and live the rest of their lives. And actually, when my Alexa does exactly what I want it to do, I'll have my bot talk to your bot, and actually cut out a whole chunk of the customer experience that currently exists. So, maybe there'll be less emphasis on the look, feel, design, usability of a website when actually it's bot to bot. That might be 15 years down the line, maybe, but it's definitely possible.
Convenience, definitely, but the natural, the personal touch almost, or the touch that I choose, will be fundamentally important. I mean, essentially, it's going to enable us to have the relationship with our technology that we want to, with a knowledge of security, of reliability, and all those things that perhaps aren't necessarily joined up in an omnichannel world yet, but will be. You've already been in touch. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to read out these answers very briefly, and we'll get a couple of thoughts on what you think. The question was, at what stage is your organisation with RPA? How advanced are you? I'll go to the minimum first of all. 6% think we use it extensively. Thank you very much for being really honest with us on that one. Very few use it extensively, 1 in 20. 1 in 10, 10%, we use it to a moderate extent. 22% say we use it, but to a minor extent, so project by project perhaps. 15% in pilots only. 36% we don't currently use it, but we're planning to. 11% we have no plans. So actually 11%, which is more than twice we use it extensively, say we have no plans. Right? Briefly, what do you think? Any thoughts, Jonathan? Yeah.
I'm a bit surprised, to be honest. We would certainly be in the 6% category. We use it extensively. It's a core pillar of our operations function. And I would have said those stats were, might have expected to see them 18 months ago, but I might have thought they might have moved on a little bit.
Well, that's right. But interestingly, because you're watching from many different sectors across the world here today, that's really interesting because it's not just financial services, it's not just banking or insurance.
Yeah.
And actually, whereas the leap has been taken, actually for smaller businesses, actually, perhaps that's a bit more difficult to make the choice.
But it might also be a reflection of where those businesses are in their development. So I think UK financial services have been laggards in technology, and we talked about legacy earlier. Actually, RPA is really useful if you've got legacy, but actually if you're in a startup organisation where you didn't ever have legacy, you built it right in the first place, you probably don't need the process automation.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think more automation doesn't necessarily mean success, and I think there are applications where it can absolutely be an answer to some of the challenges. I do also think that there's a lot of hype around automation, and quite rightly, because it has got lots of benefits. But I think that the take-up is always going to be much slower than the hype the hype curve that we see. So, and
certainly in the UK, with say 90% of the total number of companies, not necessarily the turnover and the proportion of GDP, but the number of companies, and I have experience of this myself. Actually, automation is very useful in the back office. It can take out the hassle, but actually that personal relationship still isn't potentially achievable in the way that I would want it. And that probably is true of many companies.
I actually don't find those surprising because we're out talking to different industries and people every day. So I think for a large portion of people and organizations, they're still in that phase one. They're still understanding, what is this robotics? So I think there's a huge remaining opportunity for many people to still use it for the efficiency purposes. We're talking really about what's coming after that, which some of us are already there. Others will get there in a year's time or whatever, which is how the robotics can impact the customer experience.
And it's possibly true also that you're probably right, actually, that if you look across the broader set, maybe robotics as it's known today is more applicable to larger companies with the scale to benefit from that. Whereas maybe some of the AI technologies coming down the road will be more beneficial to some of those companies, as you say, who don't have the legacy, don't have the need for that process automation, but do need better ways to engage with the customer, don't need the overhead associated
and you know
with
what
that.
I find? I think one of the difficulties with anything new is how do I adopt this new thing? And I think we, Kofax, and those in the industry with us, need to make it easier for people who are in the early stages to understand this and to have a little taste of it. You mentioned pilots. How do you do a pilot? What size is it? How do you build a business case? How do you manage it and get some result quickly? Just making it easier for people to get onto this wave is something that's I think, important.
Inevitably, it will be adopted in much larger scale across smaller organisations as well. It will be, of course, and that's happening right now. But there is initially it's not a painful journey. It's more, how much data do I really need to make this business work? And there'll be an interesting conversation to be had. And there is a huge wide world out there that perhaps smaller companies aren't yet making use of. And that'll be interesting. Before we do move on, the customer interface, Dan, how will this change our experience as customers, do you think? I mean, it should make it seamless, a lot more informed, quicker. What are the key things to get right?
Yeah, I think all of those things are right. I think first of all, we've talked about changing customer expectations. They're changing extremely rapidly. So what we have now that looks good won't look good in the future. We need to keep pushing that. But ultimately, I think customers want easy, slick transactions. And actually, they'd probably rather not have a transaction at all if there's a way of avoiding it. Because at the end of the day, if things work properly, then there shouldn't be a great deal of need for huge amounts of contact with an insurer or a bank. Maybe if you're in retail, actually, their expectations are very different and they're looking for more regular contact and they enjoy that. Maybe it's something that they enjoy and love. But I think it's quite different depending on exactly which bit of a customer experience you're looking at.
And I would guess in retail, actually, there is a willingness and I'm reaching out constantly as a customer. It's a very different line of work in many ways, although that they are homogenising. Yep. And the more contact you have with the customer, which is not too intrusive, is always going to be beneficial. That relationship can then be improved, and this is potentially the way in the future to do that. But let's move on. So far, we've discussed how robotics could transform the customer experience. Let's now look at how you can automate the customer experience more successfully and practically. Let's start with RoboChat. Elliot, if you can kick us off. What are the key strategies to make that work?
Well, I think, as a technology, it's clearly advancing. We probably experienced personally examples of where it's worked well and where it hasn't. And I think you've got to choose your implementation carefully. So clearly, the advice here is not to go off the deep end, but to start small. Data is a key enabler to any successful chat implementation. And if you haven't got the data for your chatbot to be insightful, to actually be able to respond to customer demand, then you're probably going to cause more frustration than you are in terms of improving experience. So I think you've got to pick very carefully that experience, think through the end-to-end journey, and start small.
Jonathan, I would ask actually that you could potentially blow it if your chatbot, if you don't let people know, at least now, that they are dealing with
absolutely
a bot of some sort.
Sorry, my own view would be, certainly at the moment, as you say, it's an emerging technology. We're still grappling with the best place to start using it. Definitely start small, etc. But I think in the short term, I think customers, until it's seamless, I think you need to let them know what they're dealing with. I think if the customer feels you're trying to pretend to them that they're dealing with a person and they find out it's not a person, they're not going to be happy. Whereas if they knew up front, actually this is a seamless journey between FAQs on one side and talking to a person through a video link on the other, and they're moving along a continuum, and that they get to choose, I think they're totally okay with that.
But when I see I am your virtual assistant, can I help? Yeah. Hey, that's all upfront and personal. That's no problem at all. Yeah. I make a choice.
Exactly.
And that's a good way. That's a good way forward. But I guess the difficulty is certainly now, and will be in the future as well. It'll have to be judged as you go, testing and learning. In what contexts do you think successfully you can bring in bots and automated services like that can interact in an interface with the customer?
Well, I think when people are making an inquiry, which is typically when you see the bots today implemented, it's like an adjunct service agent, and you want to be able to say, here's who I am. I think we could use that context to present back, maybe using what we could call old-fashioned robotics, to source, well, here's what I know about you, Lindley. Is this correct?
Yeah.
If that is done well, it can create a good impression. It can radically, in a positive way, improve that user experience and the user interface. But you do need then that consent aspect so that people are aware and you're not frightening them. You're going, oh, I would like a bot to tell me, we remember you. Here's your pattern of past behaviors in a positive way rather than scaring me.
A more natural way, and actually that is going to be essential anyway with GDPR, again we mentioned it, that consent, if you are using data from a wide open source, you will have to deal with customers in an open-handed way. So it's going to be really important to do that and to pick your context, to pick the customers that you really want to deal with bots.
Yeah, I think that's right, and pick something which causes real customer pain. So again, thinking in the insurance space, because that's the one that I know. Customers generally hate IVRs, the integrated voice recognition. Well, actually, if my IVR was a bot intelligently listening to what I said and routing my call, actually that would be a big step forward to where we are now. So the next iteration of that maybe is then the simple queries are answered by the bot, and then the more complex ones. But I think you've got to get the basics right. You've got to get customers used to the experience.
And it's not fully, but a partly automated way round to a personal touch, to a personal service. I mean, we talk about personalisation constantly, and that often means single customer view, but actually a personal touch can still be achieved if you are sensitive and you learn from that experience, which is exactly what this is about. Do you think the emphasis on personal touch will come through as a very big influence on the use of bots in some way?
Yeah, I think for me, the challenge that the technology has is dealing with the sheer amount of variety that consumers present, right? So personal touch is all about, can I deal with you in an easy way? Do you understand me? And ultimately, can you answer the question or deal with the issue that I've got at hand? And I don't think consumers will see bots or the technology as a positive thing unless those boxes are ticked, unless we can deal with those things. So I think we have got to be careful, and we've got to go at the right pace for the technology, because if we do implement it too quickly, we're not going to get that personal touch. It's going to feel very impersonal. We've seen that with IVR technology, poorly implemented, it drives customers bonkers. But actually do it well, and it can be an enabler.
Yeah, Lindley, what I would say is that there's a danger here that what we do is what we did with IVRs, is that we try and automate the person out of the interaction, and I think then you lose the personal touch. So picking up on something Jonathan said, I think the future is more about the augmented human, where there'll be robots that'll help the service agent or whomever it might be know more about you, so that the personal touch can be really personal. It is a person, but that person is not ignorant of everything you've done in the past and doesn't recognize you and has no idea that you're a customer of the bank, but actually knows much about you, because in an instant the context is presented to that person and they know all about you, Jonathan. They say,
I think if you think about, I actually think it's more important to think about the personal touch than it is to try to replicate it. What I mean by that is we all go into a shop, our local shop, on a weekly basis, and there's maybe 3 people working there, and there's 1 staff member that has the personal touch and there's 2 that isn't. So that's the personal touch difference between 2 people. So trying to replicate the personal touch in a robot is going to be extremely difficult. So I think it's much more important to understand where personal touch is important, because if you don't understand it, you will trip across the line and, as you say, upset people unknowingly. So
it's a great point. So far, so good. Really interesting. We were just over halfway through our discussion. Do get in touch with your question and comments. We're coming through live at the moment. You may be watching us on demand. If you're watching us live today, then please do send in your questions and comments right here on the webpage or through Twitter at CX Robotics is the hashtag, CX Robotics. For now, it's time for our second live poll. The question for you is, what's the biggest challenge that organizations face, that your organization faces, when deploying robotics to improve the customer experience? Whatever you are on that scale from the first poll question, what is your position in terms of the ease of use? Identifying the best opportunities for robotics, that's the pain point. Making robotics smart enough, proving the value of robotics, managing the robots as an addition to the workforce, as Dermot was just saying. Where are your priorities? Answer one of those for us and get in touch, and we'll look at the results in just a minute or two's time. But in terms of rolling out RPA successfully, let's talk practically for a moment. What couple of things that you need to look at right now? We've kind of covered quite a few of them. Jonathan, key things to get right. We've talked about the personal touch at the end. Is it a legacy thing?
I think probably I was thinking, I think we get asked this question a lot. I suppose there's probably 4 or 5 things. I probably believe that executive support and a reasonable level of autonomy to allow you to get up and running. There's a lot of hurdles you need to overcome, which can be done more easily if you start small and you're given autonomy. I think leveraging some external expertise and then building up internal capability in parallel. It's very hard to just give people robotic software and say, go do this if they don't know what they're doing. I think external help is important. I think finding a killer use case is really important because you'll convince not only the people outside the group that are trying to do it, you'll convince the people themselves won't believe it until they do it and they see it. And they'll gain such an excitement and enthusiasm for the software, for the product, for the space by actually making a difference. And they'll tell other people and it'll grow and mushroom.
I mean, that internal, love of the system that they're using, I mean, that's really important. But also, something that we talk about, certainly with younger members of the team, is ideas and actually, throwing my ideas into the mix in terms of developing it. That open software kind of, approach is really good. I mean, what about ideas and how they can improve my working life and the customer's experience?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So the people that know the pain they're going through best are those that are going through the pain. That's our colleagues in our organisations who are doing manual processes which make no sense, ultimately make no sense, and are there through legacy reasons. They have all of the solutions. You've got to tap into them, and I think if you do that, then they understand and they're part of it. I think we've also got to demystify the terminology a little bit. So I think there's a little bit of a danger about talking about robotics as almost companion workforce type things. People, I think, visualise a shiny metal object with arms typing away.
You're thinking of Metal Mickey, aren't you?
That's what I'm thinking of. But it clearly isn't that. This is about making our colleagues' lives easier, so that actually they focus on value.
We have had that actually. We've had one guy. We do a tour on a regular basis, and we had one guy came in. A German colleague came in, and literally his face fell when he walked into the room and didn't see robots. He expected actual robots. So
brilliant.
You do have to demystify the thing, absolutely.
I think there's just one other point that I would add, which just because you can do robotics doesn't necessarily mean to say you should. And I think particularly when you're going into this space, you should ask yourself some very serious questions about why you're doing it. Do you need to do that process in the first place? If not, don't do it. Don't automate something that's wrong in the first place. Can you integrate in your systems, your core systems? Because again, if you can, you shouldn't need to use robotics. So I think there are some steps that you should take to really challenge yourselves. Am I using this in the right way, and is it the right use case?
Yeah. Well, we're having so many questions through. It's fantastic today. Thanks very much for writing into us. Here are the results of the poll. We'll go through it nice and quickly because there's still so much to say. The question was, what's the biggest challenge that your organisation faces when deploying robotics to improve the customer experience? Here are the results. They're actually interestingly even. May make for interesting comments or more difficult for us, but I'll go from the least, the one that you think was least important, first of all. At 20% on 2 scores was managing the robots as an addition to the workforce. That was at 20% of you thought that was the biggest challenge. Another 20% was proving the value of robotics, interestingly, which was really interesting. We've just talked about that. And one of Jonathan's thoughts was that, that's one of the most important things, to prove the value, the benefits. Next, at 24% of you thought that making robots smart enough was the biggest challenge. But the biggest challenge by far, 15% more than that, give or take, was identifying the best opportunities for robotics. Now that's understandable from a business case, Dermot. I mean, sure.
Yeah. As you were saying, it's what I would advise people, as Jonathan was advising, is to find the best opportunity is to step into the shoes of your audience, which is perhaps your customers, and walk through that journey that they go through. Customer journey mapping is a common, increasingly used technique. Figure out where are the touch points in that journey, and that will lead you to find the place where robotics are going to give you the best return, and then build what's, I think, been surprising to those who've adopted robotics in the last 2 years is this is a technology that actually can be implemented quickly and return results quickly. So you can build a business case quite easily and quickly. I would advise that the business case be not only on efficiency, but the way to get a board to agree is to show efficiency here, but also show return on customer investment. Customer loyalty, greater revenue, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I would say that you've got to approach it with the right mindset. So if your approach is, I have a robotics solution, let me find a problem to fix, you'll get it wrong. If my approach is, I have a big problem, what's the best solution? Can robotics play a part? You'll probably get it right. But just because it's shiny doesn't mean it's the right answer.
Are the days gone where clearly through the last 10 years, huge investment projects in terms of getting rid of legacy systems or patching around the outside and doing so much work on software, which has been absolutely essential and it really has improved things, but you threw money at it. And that I guess that you've learned from the lessons there.
Well, and I think that's where robotics actually can be a really successful technology, because getting into it isn't really expensive. You know, it's a myth if people think it is. You can actually acquire the technology relatively cheaply, certainly compared to those systems integrations that you talked about. And I think that's where there is the opportunity to test, to learn, to really gain some insight and to scale from that point. And I think that's probably why it's gained the attention that it has, because it's a much cheaper alternative to doing some of those things.
Dermot, that's got to be true.
Yeah, and what I like to do, because technology tends to have a behavior of taking longer than you thought. I like to challenge not only ourselves but our customers and the executives to say, let's see a result within a business quarter, because that's what executives think in. It's a business quarter, 90 days, robotics can feasibly be implemented and show a tangible return in that period, and that will then give you momentum. So if you're able to do that, then the second and third project will be easier to get done. And I recommend getting the first one in 90 days, then getting 2 more, and then thinking about the fourth topic there, which was managing the robotic workforce.
90-day test and learn. That's a new one. That's not one that many people watching us today will have heard of
You
before.
know what? I think there's a huge demand for that.
Yeah,
I think people are scared of it, but I think robotics.
No, I think that's a reasonable
you've
time.
got the experience, and so do
Very
we.
much so.
It can be done.
Yeah.
You can do that.
If you treat robotics like a traditional systems implementation, then I think you're going down the wrong route. You've got to think about it far more in a far more agile way, and as you say, seek to get those results as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I think the other thing I'd add is you've got to get the basics of proper scientific experimental design right. What is your control for this?
Yeah.
Because what I've seen in a previous life is where you focus on that kind of project, it naturally improves. Your control improves because people are thinking about it and solving problems themselves. So you might do a decent sized investment, but actually it's fixed itself manually in the meantime. So measure it properly.
Really good, really interesting. We must move on. Of course, it's not just the board whose buy-in you need. We've established that already. The rise of robotics will obviously present big changes and challenges for the workforce, the people who are joining up the dots. So a question to anybody really here, should RPA replace or support the workforce? I think we've already touched on it in some ways, but let's go into practicalities. I mean, look, if the culture's not right, if the people aren't happy and they're not chipping in their ideas, you've got a big problem, a time bomb waiting to happen. So, support, I assume. It's got to be support.
Well, I think there are 2 truths here. First is robots are here to stay. They make all our cars. Right? That's the robots people expect to see. But this is a new generation of robots that doesn't make a physical thing, but it does the work that too many humans have been doing, which is essentially navigating the breaks between our systems and gathering stuff and then translating it and delivering that experience to you. That shouldn't be human work. No. Let's get away from it, and it is going to impact some customer-facing people.
Yeah.
However, as an organizational leader, I think what we need to say to those people is that the thing to see here is opportunity to invest in your personal skills to deliver a better customer experience, and hey, use the robots to make you a better customer service rep, a better salesperson, a better person interacting with customers. Don't see them as just a threat to my job. If that's how you see them, unfortunately, it's going to be a tough future, just as it has been in the car industry for people who don't have those jobs. But you still can't do a great customer experience without an actual person representing you.
Who's woken up in a cold sweat one morning, painting a picture of how a great customer experience, a great customer service, and an experience kind of joins up with the AI and the machine learning and the robots and whatever other tech you have. How do you picture that? Is there a system, a broad system that would make that work, a feedback loop?
Well, there certainly is for us. I mean, it's probably broken into 2 broad, unfortunately, if we fade into technology for a second, 2 broad areas. So if we separate the front, in other words, the customer interaction piece, from the back, and we call one fulfillment, and we call the other, I suppose, customer experience or customer interaction. So very much see both sides of the equation being a combination of people doing the more complex, the more value add, designing new services, getting involved in robotics, leveraging SME knowledge, as you say, to build processes better on the fulfillment side. And in the customer interaction space, what we find is, I mean, we're starting to do some work with our call centre now, and the appetite for customers to have a direct customer interaction is far higher, far greater than our ability to meet it. So if a robot can take away some of the activities and some of the time that people are spending when they're not having the opportunity to interact with a customer, what you're doing is freeing them up to do that work. And what we're finding is the more that we implement robotics and automation, the more staff are embracing it as a way of freeing them up to do the things that they actually want to do anyway. And you find if you're dealing, whether it's people in branches or people on the phone, they tend to be people who like looking after the customer. Yeah. So they want that. They do not want to be logging complaints.
Jonathan, that's the
doing
context I would put it in. I talk to many organizations, and the front office, back office split is extremely typical. And what I advise is put that split in the background. Think about what I call the high value customer journeys. It could be a new account opening, it could be a policy renewal, it could be, these are the things that keep you, your organization and your people employed and growing. And orient your thinking around those high value customer journeys. In every journey, if you map it out, there's going to be places where phase one robotics, which is just an efficiency play, can make that customer journey better. If you put the customer at the center of your consideration, those journeys go from the front office to the back office and back again, and they oscillate from the beginning of the journey to the end. That gives a context that also helps the people in your business realize, okay, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to make those beginning to end customer journeys more successful. They're highly valuable to us as a company. They're going to create more employment rather than robotics stealing my job.
Before we do move on to questions, which are coming through thick and fast, thank you very much for those. Skills, in very brief, what new skills do people need at the front line? A little bit of tech knowledge, or is it just a case of is it just an awareness of the way the software works? I mean, clearly training is part of this in order to upskill or cross skill, but what do people really need from now on to do it really well with the technology in mind?
So I think there's kind of two aspects to that. One is what skills do you need to implement this new technology, and the other is what skills do people need to work with it.
Absolutely.
If I go with what do you need to work with it, then actually I think it probably brings a greater focus on customer service and empathy, because the agents are dealing with the more complex, almost more interesting sides of the work rather than the dull manual processing bit. From an implementation point of view, I think you need the same kind of things that you need for other technology delivery, but you absolutely need to have that agile mindset and to have a thought process that works on a test and learn basis. Because if you, as you mentioned earlier, if you try and do this almost in a big bang traditional systems implementation way, you'll definitely fail.
It's such a lot to take on at once as well, and there is always going to be resistance to that. So I mean, it's just a gradual listening exercise, which has a multiple of skills from the interface point, from the implementation, and then the customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we want to make lives of those dealing with customers easier, because the easier they can access the information that they need, the more they can focus on the actual human interaction. And I still think, and I hope that in the future, the human will still be at the heart of the interaction, because I think that's what we're brilliant at. I think what the technology can do is take away some of that noise in the background.
Well, look, it's already been a really detailed discussion. We hope that you found the insights from our panel so far really helpful. Many of you will be based a long way from where we are in London, so wherever you are, it's now time to share your comments and experiences with us as we spend the last 12 minutes answering your questions and comments. So throughout the webinar, we've been asking you to get in touch. You can do that through Twitter still. If you're watching us live, through the hashtag CXRobotics, or you can do it here on the webpage. Let's now have a look at those and get our panelists' thoughts and feedback. First of all, a question from Simon Potts on my screen here, non-aero revenue director at London City Airport. Thanks for writing into us, Simon. How might robotics transform airports and the whole air passenger journey? Now, interestingly, I was told in my little magic earpiece that, Dermot, can I throw that to you? Airports. How interesting. Difficult.
I'm one of those frustrated people who travels too often and has sadly horrible experiences. So context for me would be incredibly helpful. So I'm in the airport, I have my mobile device. I would like on that to be able to see everything that is relevant to my journey and to have it in a consolidated and easy to use form. Today, that's very difficult. There's a bunch of apps from this and that vendor that will do that for me or give me little pieces of the puzzle. But what robotics could do is behind the scenes pull the information either from the airport itself, from the airline, from the booking agent, from whatever the source is, represent that to me to give me the context and personalize, say, Dermot, you're running late as usual. You should leave home earlier.
Yeah.
But here's the news: your flight, the incoming from Dusseldorf is already delayed 15, so you're going to be fine. We suggest you go down this corridor because that's where the fast track. So robotics could bring context that would help give me a better airport experience, if that's the context of the question.
There is something interesting there as well, in that airports are a piece of parts. There are many, many companies interacting in order to make that work, right? So, and you mentioned that, the ability to collaborate, well, to have a really good, quick, almost real-time partnership between the other people in the supply chain. Well, wouldn't that be a good thing? Because how many times have we been stuck on the stairs coming down to the tarmac, and somebody said, yeah, it's that department or it's that department.
Yeah.
You know, joining up the dots between partners.
Yeah, and I'd say, certainly from my personal experience, I think it already has. So if you cast your mind 10 years back, then the concept of online checking and just doing a quick bag drop, I think wasn't there. There's huge queues, flights all arriving at the same time. I think it's already there. Now, whether that's technically RPA or whether that's some other kind of technology behind it.
Yeah, but hey, don't you just hate the security lines?
Yeah.
Don't they already know everything about you? Can't you do a fingerprint and walk through? I mean, the remaining biggest nightmare in airports could easily be solved by a bunch of smart robots and a bit of biotechnology.
Particularly in our case with our situation in Europe. That would be quite useful at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, let's crack on. We're at 9 minutes to. Question here from Thomas Madsen, who's a VP at Finska Bank. Thank you very much for writing in to us. Could you please provide the best example, if possible, of customer experience within the financial sector that you've experienced using robots? We may have to fudge the details slightly, but I'm sure we can get to there. And where is the best place to start, do you think? Best regards, Thomas Madsen. Thank you very much, Thomas. Good examples, and it may be from within your own.
I can give you a good, boring example.
If it's
That
short,
makes a
I'm
difference.
sure we'll
It's
stay
very
awake.
short.
There's no problem. Yeah.
So an example is if you are a call centre agent and you're on the phone to a customer and the customer has an issue, and at the end of that call you have to log the complaint. So you're now not on the phone dealing with customer queries. So if we can take that data and log the complaint for you with certainty that it's been logged and everything's okay, that agent is now free to do something else.
Very briefly, any other thoughts? Because we have so many questions coming through, we could carry on going. Any thoughts?
I mean, the point for me is that if you notice it's robotics, I think there's something going slightly wrong in the process there. So, I mean, I can't think of a good example. So
I'll give you one not in finance.
Okay.
We talked about robots making cars. Now what robots do is they feed into your panel, your smart panel, when you have an issue. Through robots going and getting data, they'll tell you where's your nearest service station. You're going to have a flat tire because we can tell already. So you have enough time to get to this one, but not to that one.
Yeah.
So robotics can fuel that kind of experience and are doing that already.
Measurement is so important. David Elliott, thank you very much for writing to us. David, you are a Group Strategy Director of Wessex Water, but you know that. Can you please elaborate on issues around building customer trust? Now, we have to be very short and sweet here, but customer trust is so important. And we talked about, in terms of robots, being honest and transparent with people about, certainly now, about when they're dealing with a system. Any thoughts on customer trust, which is so fundamentally important?
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends where you start. In financial services, we don't start in a great place, I would suggest. And I think probably less robotics. I think you've got to be upfront that it's a robot, but more about the underlying data that you're collecting and how you're dealing with that data. Yeah. So if we think about chatbots, for example, you're collecting a whole series of data that the customer probably doesn't think about, like accident scores and from there you could make all sorts of assumptions about people. You can't do that kind of thing unless you're being clear about it. So you've got to do the right thing.
That's right, and clarity is so important. Before we came on today, we did talk briefly about clarity, particularly with in voice. If you're dealing with a voice bot, I keep calling it a voice bot. They may not be the correct term in your organisations, but clarity, that they understand what consent they're giving, that information is given kind of live, or at least checking back. This is going to be important with GDPR.
I think partly because of GDPR and other regulatory requirements that force you to tell the customer what you're going to keep, get their consent, also allow them to say, actually, I want to be forgotten, which is the terminology. I would say what you need to do is integrate robotics with your communications technology so that there is a loop there and you're asking people for their consent, but it's integrated to the robots that are sourcing information behind the scene.
Okay, we have lots of questions left. Let's try and run through them as quickly as possible. James Harley, Head of Lean Transformation at Bupa. Hello, very much for writing to us. Thanks very much. How do you demonstrate to the business, particularly IT, that robotics shouldn't be treated as an overly complex piece of technology and doesn't necessarily need heavy governance? Governance is very important. We talked about the implementation side, but governance, how can we convince the organisation? Elliot?
Yeah, so I mean, our experience certainly is you've got to involve IT closely from the off. I think there is a balance there between heavy governance and being agile. We've talked about really the beauty of RPA is that you can implement it quickly. Got to be agile about it and not tie it up in a lot of red tape. But you need IT because you do need their support in terms of that infrastructure that runs a lot of this stuff. And so I think involving them early, engaging them in the process, but helping them understand what it is you're trying to achieve and how this technology works, and it doesn't necessarily interfere with a lot of the stuff that they've got going on in the back office infrastructure.
Great answer. Final question, Kaylee Morris, thank you very much for writing into us, Customer Experience Manager at John Lewis. Where do you see the future of measuring customer experience going versus the current and dated methods such as surveys, which give us traditional metrics such as NPS, CSAT and ease? Well, actually, Net Promoter Score obviously is still very important. Where are we going from now on in? And let's just sum up because it's almost time to go.
I think the measurements are going to shift from, surveying will still be there, but I think we'll be measuring those journeys end to end I've talked about and not the individual touch points where you can say I'm 80% satisfied with this, but when you step back and look at the entire end to end, it's really a 45%. We can gather so much data with robotics now that can fuel a smarter measurement in the future.
In terms of what to do next, we have sort of covered it, but we've covered so much detail. I'm an organisation that is taking my first steps. I came sort of towards the end of that first poll question. I'm looking at it project by project, minimal amount of robotics or automation in this way. What can I do now to start to identify what's really important to my company, what the customers want, and start to work out, as everyone has said earlier on, deal with the pain points. Don't try to give a personal touch all the way through and replicate human behaviour. How do you start to do that?
I would just, to summarise some of my points earlier, I would do a few simple things. Firstly, set yourself a 90-day goal. Secondly, think about those high-value customer journeys, whether it's a new account opening or a policy renewal, and pick the one to go after. Then use customer journey mapping, as I said, to step through with the customer glasses on. What is that journey? Use that mapping to identify the touch points where you can make the most impact and apply robotics very quickly. And then you'll be showing, not just telling people. Show, don't tell is a good rule to adopt. And so by the end of 90 days, force yourself and use whatever agile techniques you use in-house through that 90-day cycle. And it'll work.
The advice has been given, off you go. I really hope that you've enjoyed the last hour and that it's provided some really useful take-home advice to help you in preparing for the future of robotics in your organisation. Thanks very much for sending in your questions. Lots came through, and for the poll questions. Sorry we couldn't get to every single question, but I hope that gave you some a good idea of the landscape. We would also really appreciate your feedback on the discussion today. It's that vital component in making sure that we cover the issues that you care about next time. So please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar by filling in the form on the right-hand side of your screen somewhere over there. We do value your opinion on that one. But as we've heard, robotics is clearly on the rise, and any company that wants to succeed in their industry is employing or has to employ robots now and in the future, not only to cut corners and cut costs, but more importantly, to intelligently improve customer experience. Robotics can differentiate your organization if you use the technology really well, transforming beginning to end customer journeys and really engaging customers more effectively than ever before. With that in mind, we do hope that you'll be able to join us at one of Marketforce's upcoming events that will look at the issues, challenges in more detail. You can find out more on the website, marketforce.eu.com. Or you can find out much more about Kofax at kofax.com. That's correct, isn't it? Okay, well, many thanks to our panel today for taking part and to Kofax for supporting the webinar. And of course, thanks to you for watching and sending in your comments and your questions. We'll see you very soon. Until then, all the best. Take care. And how are you feeling?